I find that people don't really internalize this fact. The Senate could be moving much faster than it is on anything, but they're keeping the Senate in a quorum call to hold the floor in stasis. A lot of times there's benign reasons for this, right? It's that they're trying to work out an amendment deal in the back. They haven't quite figured out the text of what they want on the floor. Senators are at fundraiser, like they're scheduling reasons. But that's the true filibuster, honestly, is these extended quorum calls on the Senate floor. So to get around that, if you were going to force Democrats to talk, 51 senators would have to present themselves as a quorum. Now, there are creative ways I think you could do this. But the principle is, right, once they're talking, they have to keep talking. Because if they drop, right, if they are physically no longer able to talk and there's a quorum present, the vote happens automatically.
Mm-hmm.
You can that, and you've broken the filibuster at that point. You don't have to have 60 votes. Cloture's not invoked. You just simply put the question. Thune would call the question. A quorum is present. There is no one seeking to speak any longer. So the vote happens. You following me?
Yeah.
So this goes back to a key principle of the Senate. And this is so funny because I spend 10 weeks teaching Senate procedure, right? And I teach all these rules and all these things. But once you've reached the Zen master level of Senate procedure, which I don't claim to have, but once you reach it, you suddenly realize that all of the rules don't matter.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim, and I'm the CEO of American Moment. I love to say that, and I'm very glad to have you back with us for another episode this week. We brought back the fantastic Rachel Bovard. You all loved her episode on the United States Senate so much. We decided to bring her back to talk some more about it. We spent some more time talking about why the Senate is so lazy, why they hate to do their jobs, and why the president might like to get rid of the filibuster. So it was a fantastic conversation. As we've said many times before, Rachel has been one of the greatest mentors that we've ever had, is a very close friend of American Moment, and we've learned so much from her over the years. I mean, it is quite entirely possible that this organization would not exist without her. So we're very glad that she joined us in studio today. So we will go now to Rachel Bovard. Rachel, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
I think you are the quickest repeat guest that we've ever had. And I think the reason for that is people are so hungry for information about what's actually like the inside baseball, what's happening specifically on the Hill, which is usually what people are most frustrated with. So I think you had a lot of you made a lot of people very angry by your last, and not at you, but at the people who are purporting to serve them. I think a really good place to start here is, talking about how the president has said that he wants to nuke the filibuster. This has become a very contentious topic in DC circles. I think a really good place to start with for our listeners is, can you explain the history of the filibuster first?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing to understand about Donald Trump wanting to nuke the filibuster is that he is not alone. There are two camps of people in Washington that evergreen, always and forever want to nuke the filibuster, and that is presidents and House members. Always hate the filibuster or want to nuke it. So Trump is just the latest in a long line of distinguished priors who want to go down that road. But when you think about the filibuster, everybody sort of thinks about it as, what it is, right? It's supposed to be long speeches. People think about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's what the movie that popularized the filibuster. It's, people standing and speaking until they can speak no longer. But in modern practice, it's really just turned out to be this 60 vote threshold. So let me back up even further. So when you think about the House and the Senate in relation to each other, the House is a majoritarian body. It is the rules, the founders set it up that way, and its rules reflect that, meaning it is where the majority can move fast, break things, and crush the minority with impunity. The rules.
I don't understand why anybody ever wants to be a House member.
The House is awesome, but it is set up with that in mind, right? There are no delay tactics. There are no filibusters in the House. The rules, again, allow the majority to just move very fast. It's the populous body, and its rules are designed that way. The Senate is the opposite. The Senate is supposed to be a much more deliberative place. And in fact, the chamber's rules are built around this idea of deliberation, meaning, unlike the House, where the majority rules and the speaker is the most powerful, the speaker of the majority is the most powerful person in the House, in the Senate, all senators have almost equal authority. And that's designed to protect the rights of the minority. So if you think about the House being reflecting the will of the majority outright without, any delay, in the Senate, the minority is incredibly empowered. And it's not just the minority party, it's the minority viewpoint. And this is a very fundamental feature of parliamentary procedure, is to make sure the minority can speak. So the Senate is built around the rights of the minority, which means everybody has a right to speak, everybody has a right to be heard. The way that manifested from the beginning of the Senate up until 1917 was with debate. The Senate rules allow for endless debate on a question. Okay? Anyone can come down and debate on the Senate floor. And the way that it works in practice is this: there's only 3 things that can ever happen on the Senate floor: a speech, a quorum call, and a vote. And if one of those things isn't happening, the other 2 must be, right? So if there's a quorum call in place, it's because a vote and a speech are not happening. If there's a speech taking place, it's because a vote and a quorum call is not happening. The upshot is this: if no one is speaking and there is no quorum call, the vote happens automatically. Okay? So if a speech is happening, it is delaying a vote, or a quorum, right? So the speech as a delay tactic, that's sort of the fundamental principle of what a filibuster is. Now, in 1917, Woodrow Wilson got very upset about this. Again, going back to this idea of the long line of presidents who have hated the filibuster. He wanted to pass a bill related to World War I about, funding submarines, all these things. Under pressure from Wilson, the Senate instituted the cloture rule, and that's Rule 22. And that put in place for the first time ever a vote to break a filibuster. Prior to 1917, the only thing that ended a filibuster was physical exhaustion or an agreement that everybody had their say and we can just move to the vote. Cloture was put in place in 1917, and that is a vote to end the filibuster. That is what people know as the 60 vote requirement. But at the time it was passed, it was actually 67 votes. Because, again, the right of every senator to debate a question is central to the Senate. Central. And they wanted a very high threshold for people to say, we can shut you down now. In later years, in the 1970s, they lowered it to 60. And that's how it's been ever since. Rule 22 says to end debate on a question requires invoking cloture, and that is 60 votes. Everybody thinks, it now takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate, and that's because almost every question is filibustered. It doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, later, not that long ago, actually, like in the 90s, major spending bills, appropriations bills, passed at simple majority. They didn't have to invoke cloture because everyone just agreed, okay, we're done now, right? Everybody's had their say. Everybody's said everything they want to say. They've had all the amendment votes they want to have. All right, let's put the question and we'll just vote. It's only been in the last roughly like 15 to 20 years, every debatable question has become subject to a filibuster, meaning cloture has to be invoked on everything. So that's the 60 votes that have to be invoked before anything can be passed. This is true of judges too. We've nuked the filibuster on judges now, but I mean, think about the contentious Supreme Court confirmations. Clarence Thomas was confirmed with less than 60 votes because people just, as a matter of course, didn't filibuster judges. It was understood that the president has the right to select these people. The Senate has the right to confirm. You can vote no, but filibustering was sort of unseemly. And it really wasn't until the Senate Democrats went after Miguel Estrada under the Bush administration and filibustered him multiple times that it became, now every judge is filibustered to the point where both parties broke the filibuster on judges. So that doesn't exist anymore. But it still exists on the legislative side.
Yeah. So what was the impact of nuking the filibuster on judges, and how would it compare to the impact of nuking the filibuster for legislation?
So nuking the filibuster on what we call the executive calendar, so on the judges, the confirmations, wasn't just judges, it was all confirmations, because the Senate has two modes, right? It has legislative business, which is all bills, and then it has executive business, which is confirmations. And that was a slow snowball, right? It started with Harry Reid nuking the filibuster on basically everything below the Supreme Court. And then Mitch McConnell came in and nuked filibuster on the Supreme Court.
Right.
And then McConnell came in again and nuked the post-cloture 30 hours. So a lot of the extra debate that happens is now gone for the large majority of confirmations outside of like cabinet secretaries and Supreme Court. So it not only is the filibuster gone, the post-cloture debate is gone too. So we've virtually wiped out every method of, and then John Thune most recently came in and nuked the en bloc, so saying, this under Senate rules, you had to confirm one at a time. He nuked that, and now they confirm in groups. So there's literally no minority rights left on the executive calendar. It's a little bit different, I think, for the legislative side, because, for personnel, you can say personnel is policy, but these are individual positions that are limited in many cases by the term of the presidency, right? So you're confirming, this isn't necessarily true for judges, but for a lot of the administration positions, okay, 4 years in, they do what they do, then they leave. When you're talking about the legislative side, you're talking about laws that really change the way the country works, change how the government responds to the will of the people, change and make permanent and I think often lasting dramatic change to the country. You're just talking about kind of two different things.
Yeah.
I would argue on the judicial filibuster in particular, it has had consequences. Yes, we've gotten more people in, but the judges have become far more partisan, right? These are partisan exercises now to confirm these judges. So speaking to the Democrat side, the quality of the nominees has plunged, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has seen these clips of Senator John Kennedy asking basic legal questions of like different parts of the Constitution to these Democrat judicial nominees, and they have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't need Republican votes anymore. So it is a partisan exercise, right? When you needed 60 votes, you had to be someone that could appeal to at least a small portion of the other side. So you tended to get more moderate nominees on both sides. We don't have that anymore. We have partisan Republicans and partisan Democrats on either side of the bench. And I think you are seeing this play out now.
Right.
In many cases that, the Trump administration is fighting. You have Biden judges and you have, Trump judges, and you get different results.
Yeah. The Democrat judges don't need any of this legal knowledge because the outcomes of these cases are already predetermined in the political recesses of their mind. You know, it's like one of those things. What is this president in particular hoping to get out of nuking the filibuster? Like, what is his, edge case for it that may be different from past presidents?
I mean, it isn't different from past presidents, right? He just wants his agenda passed. Yeah. And it is a completely understandable impulse. And also, we are in this environment where, minorities in the Senate are allowed to quote unquote filibuster without actually having to filibuster, right? When we talk about the talking filibuster, that is what a filibuster is and what it's supposed to be. But now in the modern context, because of cloture, we just say things like not getting 60 is a filibuster, right? Because you are allowing the negative to inform the situation. We didn't get 60, so therefore this filibuster goes on unabated. But there are things that could be done to exhaust the minority into submission that are not being done. But to go back to your question, Trump wants his agenda passed. I get that. Although the unfortunate thing about nuking the filibuster to do that is it makes the ability to pass things fast, and then it makes the ability to undo them quite fast.
Yeah.
Because if you if you nuke the filibuster, then you only need 51 to pass and you need 51 to undo. Right now, you would need 60 votes to pass and 60 votes to undo. It's just a lot harder. It's how Obamacare still exists, right? Part of Obamacare passed via reconciliation, which only needs a simple majority. There was a big statutory part of Obamacare that passed in the traditional legislative way. Harry Reid got 60 votes by grinding Republicans into submission. Republicans have never been able to undo it.
Yeah. Has anyone suggested that we should just make them actually go up there and talk again for like 40 hours or whatever? Just like stand up there?
Well, that's, during the shutdown, it got to a point where I kind of think that's what should have been happening.
Yeah. I get it's not as catchy as nuke the filibuster. Like you'd have to find some like short, pithy phrase for it.
That's the thing. Like the Senate rules, even before the cloture rule was instituted, the Senate rules have always provided a way to break the filibuster, right? They have prioritized debate, but they have always provided a way to break the filibuster. Cloture is the easy way. Cloture is you get a petition, you file it. If you get 60 votes, you've broken the filibuster, you can move forward. The hard way is that you make them talk. And that has always been available from the beginning of the Senate to now. It has always been available as an option for these senators. And the reason they don't do it is because, going back to our previous discussions, it's hard and the senators hate working.
Yeah.
Right? So, and again, it's the principle that enshrines everything you don't like about the Senate. It's like when you put the glasses on and you can suddenly see the aliens everywhere. If you put the glasses on of the Senate is lazy and they don't like working, you will understand everything that is happening.
Yeah. The thought process for them goes, oh, if I make them talk, they're going to make me talk later.
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that to actually force a minority party to talk, this goes back to the three things that can only ever be happening: a speech, a quorum call, and a vote. It requires Republicans to present a quorum. So a quorum is the constitutional requirement for the number of senators that are supposed to be on the floor to transact official business. It's 51, right? Most of the time, the Senate now, because when you turn on C-SPAN 2, no one's there.
Yeah, it's like three guys.
Yeah, or if someone's there, it's like three people. And they presume a quorum,
Yeah.
right? Just for the purpose of moving forward. They don't require a physical quorum in the chamber. And there's rules about, if business has just been transacted, that provided the evidence of a quorum, all these things. But to force senators, or to force Democrats to talk, you would have to have 51 in the chamber. Otherwise, the Democrats could suggest the absence of a quorum, right? And then once you're in a quorum, they don't have to be talking and they're delaying the vote. So they could use the quorum call, which is, by the way, how the Senate routinely delays business. So going back to when you turn on C-SPAN 2, if there's any, rabid watchers of the Senate, they'll know when you turn it on.
All four of them.
Yeah, all four of them. And I'm one of them, right?
Yeah.
You'll see no one's on the floor and it'll say at the bottom of the screen, the Senate is in a quorum call, or it'll say waiting for a senator to speak. And the clerk is calling the names very slowly. She'll say, Mrs. Alsobrooks, and there'll be a 20-minute wait. And then she'll say, Mrs. Baldwin, and there'll be another 20-minute wait. What it is what we call a fake quorum or a dead quorum. It is designed to keep the Senate in stasis because, again, if there's no quorum call happening, a speech has to be happening or the vote happens automatically. I find that people don't really internalize this fact. The Senate could be moving much faster than it is on anything, but they're keeping the Senate in a quorum call to hold the floor in stasis. A lot of times there's benign reasons for this, right? It's that they're trying to work out an amendment deal in the back. They haven't quite figured out the text of what they want on the floor. Senators are at fundraiser, like there's scheduling reasons. But that's the true filibuster, honestly, is these extended quorum calls on the Senate floor. So to get around that, if you were going to force Democrats to talk, 51 senators would have to present themselves as a quorum. Now, there are creative ways I think you could do this. And, but the principle is, right, once they're talking, they have to keep talking. Because if they drop, right, if they are physically no longer able to talk and there's a quorum present, the vote happens automatically.
Mm-hmm.
You can that, and you've broken the filibuster at that point. You don't have to have 60 votes. Cloture is not invoked. You just simply put the question. Thune would call the question. A quorum is present. There is no one seeking to speak any longer. So the vote happens. You following me?
Yeah.
So this goes back to a key principle of the Senate. And this is so funny because I spend 10 weeks teaching Senate procedure, right? And I teach all these rules and all these things. But once you've reached the Zen master level of Senate procedure, which I don't claim to have, but once you reach it, you suddenly realize that all of the rules don't matter.
Yeah.
And the light switch flipped for me when I read this quote from Trent Lott, which I may have mentioned before, but it goes like this. And he's a former majority leader. There are only actually two rules in the Senate: exhaustion and unanimous consent.
Yeah.
And you only reach the second once you've reached the first. This is the principle of the talking filibuster. You physically grind the minority down, because filibustering in the old-fashioned way, in the talking way, is difficult. The rules are that you have to stand the whole time. You cannot sit and you cannot lean. You lean down on your desk, done. You've lost the floor. You can't leave, right? You have to stay on the floor the whole time. You can't leave. There's no bathroom breaks. You're not breaking for dinner. You can't eat anything on the Senate floor. And the only two beverages you can have are water and milk. I learned this, by the way, when I was staffing Rand Paul's filibuster in 2013,
Hmm.
which wasn't actually planned. Like, it happened to be a snow day in Washington, and Rand just said, we're doing it live.
Yeah.
And so we learned all the rules about it while we
Wow.
were doing it.
Yeah.
You can yield to other senators for a question, but you have to keep talking. And it is, physically demanding. And Democrats suffer from the same, ailments of the Republican side, which is they hate being on the floor. They don't have a ton of senators that can do this, right? Like, they have a clutch of them, Cory Booker and Chris Murphy and some of the younger guys.
Is this a very polite way of saying they're all so old they can't stand for that long?
Physical stamina is required for this, and it's hard to sustain.
Yeah.
So yeah, Republicans have always turned up their nose at this strategy because, well, we can't sit on the floor for that long. We can't just wait Democrats out. I think there are ways to get around that we can talk about if you want, but the principle is there are ways in the Senate rules to get around the filibuster outside of cloture.
Yeah. I think you're going to be proven to be very prophetic about a lot of these issues. I have not heard anybody else talk about these Senate rules the way that you do, and the things that we could do to actually put forward legislation that would make the country better. Is there anybody else that talks about this? Is there anybody in the Senate that gets it?
Yeah, there are staff that have been there a long time who understand this. The older senators understand it too, because they've been around and they've seen how this has worked in practice. So, McConnell, Collins, Grassley, Wicker, some of the older senators deeply are, intuit this. And
Yeah.
they have this, organic understanding of the institution.
Too bad they don't share our ideological priorities.
I know, my fear is, like, in both conferences, we've sort of reached critical mass where there's senators who just have never seen the Senate really function before.
Yeah.
In this traditional way. So they don't quite even know the amount of authorities available to them.
Yeah. Before we get to some of the alternatives to nuking the filibuster, I want to talk about, I saw, kind of an interesting line of attack, which was, if you were to nuke the filibuster, the best time to do it would have been right when you started your term, right?
Mhm.
As president, not 9 or 10 months in, when the Democrats could potentially be that much closer to undoing all the things that you want to do. What do you say to that?
I think as a strategic matter, it's probably correct, right? I think because the thing is, if you're operating in a post-nuclear environment, you've nuked the filibuster, and you can pass everything by 51 votes, you have limited time to do that because you have to plan on everything that you've just passed being undone by the next Democrat majority, right? And assuming they have a Democrat president that's not going to veto everything. That is how this is going to work now. Lawmaking in this country will slosh back and forth like water in a bathtub. And it is, we know what Democrats will do if they nuke the filibuster because they've told us, and they have seemingly lockstep party unity on what they want to do. They want to use the filibuster to structurally remake the country in their own image and cement their power base such that Republicans never win again. That is what Democrats plan to do with the filibuster, right? They want to add DC as a state, add Puerto Rico as a state, pack the Supreme Court, change election law.
And you can't really undo making a state.
Correct. So, but what I have as a strategic matter, I have less understanding of what Republicans want to do with the filibuster.
Mm.
I don't know what we have the votes to do. I can think of a million things we could do. But Republicans could barely pass the one big beautiful bill with 51 votes.
Yeah.
Do we have 51 votes to do all of the structural changes that would need to happen to ensure that we never lose again? Because that's what I would want to see, right? I would want to see us making Texas into 6 different Republican states. I would want to see us ban abortion nationwide. I would want to see us pack the court with our people. All these structural things that make sure Republicans are in power forever, because that's what Democrats have told us they plan to do. As far as I can tell, we don't have the votes for that. And, in my conversations with people, who are pro-nuking the filibuster, this is my question. All right, what are we going to do? Usually the answer I get back is we could pass the SAVE Act, which is nationwide voter ID. Well, that bill is currently being bottled up in the Senate Rules Committee, chaired by Mitch McConnell. Do we have 51 votes to pass the SAVE Act? I don't actually know. And even if we did, do you even have time to implement nationwide voter ID in a way that would be meaningful? Or, because the next Democrat president, next Democrat Senate, they will undo it immediately. Like day one coming into office, that is what they're going to undo.
Yeah.
So my point is, if you're going to nuke the legislative filibuster, you also better have full Republican Party support for massive transformational change, because that's what Democrats will do. So we get one shot at this. And if we don't have those votes, then nuking is not prudent.
This is a bit of a sidebar, but I think it's a really interesting one. Can you explain the lore behind? I'm familiar with it, but I want to make sure our listeners understand that the turning Texas into 6 states thing.
Oh, I actually have no idea about the lore behind it. I just think
you
it's something we
don't?
should do now.
So it's my limited understanding of it is there is actually a provision within the now I might get community noted for this later or whatever, but I saw it in a YouTube video once, so I'm sure it's true. That Texas basically at any point in time can vote to divide itself into, I think it's either 5 or 6 different states. Like they actually have the constitutional ability to do that.
Yeah, to me, I was like, what's our biggest landmass? Oh, Texas. All right, you're breaking up.
Actually, is it not Alaska?
Oh, I guess it would be, yeah, in the
But
contiguous United States. Yeah.
Too unpredictable. Politics wise. I think, the president's frustration with the Senate is understandable. As we covered, on things that are on the executive calendar in the last episode. I'm wondering how much of this, consternation on his part could have been prevented if we had a Republican conference that maybe had prepared a little more.
Yeah, so this is, it's just frustrating because Democrats suffered no consequence really, like in the Senate for in a filibuster of this length, which is the longest in history, right?
Mhm.
Yes, you can argue like political consequences, right? All of that is separate from what the Senate rules allow. And if you want to look like a muscular majority, the way that you approach a disgruntled minority is that you make them physically pay for the cost of their obstruction. This is how Harry Reid passed Obamacare. Like, again, going back to the statutory example, not the reconciliation side, there is a reason it passed on Christmas Eve, because Republicans were not giving 60 votes. And he was like, guys, there's a lot of horse trading that went on and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, he said, we are in session 24/7 until this passes. I will make you stay through Christmas. I will make you stay through New Year's. The physical toll was a big part of how that passed, right? That is no love lost between me and Harry Reid, but that was a power move, right? That was a muscular move. So I think, what there are creative ways to implement these strategies, and kind of going back to the classical example of forcing them to talk. There have to be 51 Republicans who sit in the chamber. This could take days. Senators are not going to want to do this. They have places to be, all this kind of stuff. There are ways to get around that, and that is what I call sort of tyrannizing the minority.
Love it.
Yeah. And
I'm in.
It goes back to, so we talked about the dead quorum, right? Which is this endless roll call that's never supposed to reach the end, that basically just holds the floor in stasis. There is something also called a live quorum, and that summons all senators to the floor because it's, a vote's about to happen. We need you all here. Okay. And the only person that can call a live quorum is John Thune, or whoever the majority leader happens to be at the time. Live quorums are a constitutional requirement for members. They have to show up, because if they don't, because voting and their presence on the Senate floor is literally the only constitutional requirement of the job. Yeah. Everything else, lawmaking, all this kind of stuff, not actually. Committee work, not real. Yeah. The only thing they have to do is vote, such that if they don't show up, the leader can then compel the presence of absent members, meaning he can tell the sergeant at arms to go physically bring these senators to the floor. This has happened a couple times in the Senate's history. Most famously, I think the last time it really happened was the 80s, when Democrats were trying to deny a quorum for some Republican tax bill. Sergeant at arms was sent out to find them, ended up carrying Bob Packwood from Oregon onto the Senate floor feet first, like hurt his arm. And he later gave a speech like in a sling, like, okay, we should calm down. Like, yeah. But this is, it's a real thing. So again, you're trying to avoid senators just having to sit in the chamber. The leader could at any time spring a live quorum, because when you spring a live quorum, you're demanding all senators come to the floor. And if Democrats are unprepared to speak and they don't have anyone lined up, you can call the vote. right? And if they are unprepared for that, well, sucks to be you,
Yeah.
right? And
So why is nobody
well,
doing this?
worse, I'm not done yet. Worse, I call this the ambush live quorum. You do it in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
You drag everybody out of bed at 3 a.m. Maybe Republicans know what's going on, Democrats don't. Republicans are prepared to show up. Democrats are scrambling out of bed in their pajamas, trying to arrange speakers or else to prevent the vote from happening. Or you do it multiple times. You call ambush quorums at 3 a.m., and then you do it the next night at 5 a.m., and then you do it at 1 p.m., and then you do it at 2 a.m. The first 3 of those aren't real. The 4th one is when you put the question, right? So the first 3 times you just drag them to the floor. So it's tyranny, right? It's Chinese water torture because so much of what the Senate's like, again, when you're dealing with obstruction, it's a psychological game.
Yeah.
It is physically imposing a cost and it is mentally and psychologically imposing a cost.
Could you do this, like, say that a senator is going to be at a fundraiser in their home state or whatever? I mean, and you call a live quorum.
Yeah, so it's not courtesy, right? Usually you
other
side courtesy.
You called it tyranny. So
But this is my point, right? Like if you are obstructing at this level, you have lost the right to courtesy.
Yeah.
So usually like the way that I would handle this is I would make sure the Republican conference knows exactly what's going on. I would tell Republicans. My goal is not to inconvenience Republicans. In fact, this is how I would get around to making them sit on the floor for days or hours at a time, right? Is you do it this way. So they all know what's going on. Democrats have no idea. Smart Democrats would not have gone home because the Senate would be in session. But if they did, again, sucks to be you.
Yeah.
Like you don't, generally speaking, the Senate operates on this courtesy, this comedy, not comity comedy, like, and you respect each other's, like, hey, you have these gentlemen agreements. I don't think those things hold when you are in obstruction of this scale and category.
Yeah. So if there are a bunch of smart people on the Hill who know these rules and know how they work, why is nobody doing this?
I think the charitable explanation obviously is they were trying to cut some kind of deal. They knew a deal was coming. They knew they wouldn't have to wear Democrats down like this. Us on the outside, we don't know that that's happening. And so my fear looking at that situation was, something had to change the political calculus. Because when you do something like this, the whole landscape changed. You're pulling the rug out from the narrative. You're throwing something new into the situation. And so much of Senate procedure is you fight things all the way to the floor. You're not sure of the outcome, right? You don't know exactly how this is going to end, but you know enough chaos is going to be created that some new opportunity might come out of it that you can take advantage of. And that's what you do when you're entrenched like this. Mm-hmm. When you're starting to get entrenched, when there's inertia settling in, no side seems like they're going to move, you have to do something to change the conversation. And I think this could have been it, because I'm not on the inside. I didn't know a deal was close to be getting cut. But the second thing is that why didn't you want to look muscular, right? Everybody's talking about nuking the filibuster because they're so understandably frustrated. So show them a little fight. And the third reason is it's fun. Right? Yeah. Senators don't have fun anymore. They don't do anything anymore. They just come to the floor and rubber stamp nominees and then go sit on their carpet squares and wait for constituent meetings. This is being a senator. This is, when the Senate used to be full of titans and lions and men who really who knew the chamber and could use it to change the course of history. This is the kind of stuff they did. There was creativity and there was willpower and there was all these things. So number 3 is because it's fun.
Yeah. Why do you think we don't have many senators like that anymore?
I think we could. I think, the institutional incentives are not aligned in that direction. Senators don't like to be inconvenienced. And I get it. We're all human, right? They like to be able to plan their day. They like to know exactly when the votes are happening. A lot of them are running for governor or whatever. They don't want to be here. They have fundraisers they need to make. They need to do all these things. I get that. So these surprise things are totally inconvenient to them.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily like being here. And, you have to overcome this inertia of having to do things. And so we've just created an environment where that's more the norm. And senators have come to expect that, regularity and that predictability. And so if you're the guy who's upending the apple cart, who's throwing votes on the floor and surprising senators, like people get really mad at you.
Yeah.
Ask Roger Marshall when he did that rogue motion to proceed. People.
Oh yeah. I think too, to what you were saying earlier, we do have young guys who are passionate about the policy. They have enough energy and fight, to be willing to do stuff like this, but they don't maybe they don't necessarily like have the institutional knowledge, right, to be a true master of the Senate.
Yeah, I think another thing that's developed over time too is, when I first started working in the Senate, you had senators who just knew this stuff inside and out. They knew the rules, they understood what was available to them. They were running out of the cloakroom, second degreeing stuff without consulting with their staff. They knew it, right? The staff were there to help them, but the senators really knew it. A lot of senators now look at procedure work as staff work. Like they outsource it to their staff. They're like, oh, I didn't need to know that. Like my staff will figure it out. But a result of that is that, they've sort of lost that the Senate is kind of an ecosystem. They expect when they go to the floor that they pull a certain lever and they get a perfect outcome. And they don't want to go to the floor if anything bad might happen or the outcome is not 100% guaranteed to be what they want. The Senate floor doesn't work that way because it's humans. It's humans responding to each other, right? You never know which way it's going to go. It's kind of the attraction of it for me. It's like anything could happen.
Yeah.
But senators hate that. And so it's kind of become baked into this. Well, that's a strategy, but it might fail for these 5 reasons. We don't know it, but it might fail. And sometimes that's enough to convince people we can't do it then because there's not a perfect chance of success. But it goes back to this idea I was mentioning where chaos is its own form of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Like unpredictability creates new outcomes that you didn't have before. And we've seen that over the course of the Senate's history. That's how in 2007 the Senate Republicans took down the immigration bill. That was Bush's immigration bill. They took it down and they had no plan. It was just they fought it all the way to the floor and an opportunity popped up, right? So that principle is really embedded in the conference now too. We don't want to do anything unless it has a perfect chance of success. And life is just not like that. The Senate's not like that.
They want to minimize risk much more than senators of the past.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, another reason that you and the important institution that you work for have been in the news lately is because of this insane FBI investigation that has made me viscerally angry. I was stuck on the tarmac in one of these flight cancellation things because of the shutdown, and I got mad about it all over again and was texting with Ed for like an hour about it. But I'm wondering if you could explain Arctic frost, what happened, and why it is so outrageous and why people like us are so angry about it.
Yeah, it really shocks the mind when you understand what it is. So Arctic frost was the code name for Jack Smith's January 6th election interference dragnet. Under the auspices of election interference, he basically used that authority to try and harass, intimidate, dismantle, and shame the political right out of existence. And I have never seen something operate at this scale before. People say, oh, this is Joe Biden's Watergate. People, Watergate was child's play compared to what this was. Hundreds of subpoenas sent out all over the country, including for all categories of the political rights infrastructure, from United States senators and congressmen to the organized infrastructure of outside groups, including CPI that exists here in DC, and then activists throughout the country were all tied up in this. The point of it was not necessarily to jail anyone, although that was the point, right? But 2 years in, he still never found a crime, right? Looking into the movement left, right, and everywhere, never found anything. The real point was harassment and intimidation and a chilling effect for anyone participating in Republican politics. Jack Smith wanted to create friction points and raise the pain points so high that people would just give up, stop exercising their First Amendment rights, stop using their material resources to help the right. And if he got lucky enough to put someone in jail, he would. But the process was the punishment. People spent thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars, complying with these subpoenas for nothing, right? There was no crime. You could never point to evidence of a crime. And this was like this dragnet because 2 of the groups caught up in it One didn't even exist on January 6th, 2021. The second existed on paper, but hadn't set up any operations, right? The point of this was, again, harassment, intimidation, bankruptcy, smears. At CPI, we were caught up in it in a number of different ways. We had to comply with some subpoenas we knew about. There were secret subpoenas that we didn't know about for our bank records, for our HR records. Ed Corrigan, the president of CPI, showed up in a redacted batch of documents in the Seattle field office of the FBI. They hilariously ridiculous accusations that Ed Corrigan is pro-Putin and anti-Biden and has plans that are bad for the civil war or for the FBI, and he's fomenting a civil war. Like, Ed Corrigan and I teach Senate staff what cloture is. Like,
Yeah.
that is the extent of the activism here at CPI is
Right.
like 10 weeks of Senate procedure.
Yeah. The only I had this conversation with him the other day. The only true thing in that letter was he does indeed hate the FBI. That was the one true thing
and
that they said.
apparently that was threatening enough to the FBI that email went up the chain at the FBI Seattle field office, which is insane. Like, it's hilarious to us because it was so hyperbolic and ridiculous, but it's also not hilarious because the government took it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing that made it, obvious how expansive this had become to me, was like that, these reports were being written about Ed in Seattle. Like, why? Why
With
in
Antifa
Seattle?
burning down buildings in their backyard.
Yeah.
But the real threat was some guy
3,000 miles away teaching cloture to a bunch of 20-year-olds.
Yeah. Teaching, Rule 16 in the appropriations process. Oh no, threat to democracy.
Yeah. I was very, shocked by all of this, and a little disappointed that I wasn't invited. That wasn't included in the documents. I must work harder. But what, if any, are going to be the consequences for this? Because I have not seen many real things that we are going to, put on these people who are persecuting us.
Yeah. Well, and that's the question, because the scale of the punishment must match the scale of the crime.
Yeah.
Accountability under the law has to happen for these people. I was making this point earlier to somebody else, because people have said to me, well, what laws were broken? The system of law was undermined to the most catastrophic extent, right? The founders never envisioned that the justice system would be used like this to persecute, harass, and potentially jail your political opposition at scale, which is what happened here. We always thought the constraint on this stuff was the oath of office, right? We've thought people would be bound to the sacred oath, and the founders thought they would be bound by the fear of hell.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that constrains the left is fear. And that has to be fear of accountability, fear of professional repercussion. There should be no redactions on those FBI documents. In addition, every FBI agent that was involved in this, every DOJ line attorney that was involved in this, their name needs to be out there. I want an explanation for why they're still working at DOJ and FBI. If they are, they need to be fired, disbarred, security clearances removed. There is no professional advancement for you after you participate in weaponization at this scale. There has to be, if laws were broken at the top, because again, this was signed off on by Attorney General Merrick Garland, his deputy Lisa Monaco, Christopher Wray. The entire agency knew about this. If laws were broken, those people need to be held accountable. There need to be perp walks and jail time. And if Judge Boasberg is found to have broken the law in signing a gag order on the subpoena for Senate phone records, he needs to be impeached. There need to be consequences exacted for this. I will be deeply unsatisfied if it is just the traditional Republican way of doing things, which is, we caught you, now we're going to have a hearing. Look how mad I am. This is my angry face. And then we just move on. We're
going to have a hearing and go on Fox to talk about what we talked about in the hearing.
And even already you're seeing, and I am pretty upset by this. In the deal to reopen the government, there's a provision that says senators are allowed to sue the DOJ for the fact that they were spied on by Jack Smith, right? It opens up, they are allowed to sue for monetary damages. Okay, what about the rest of us?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what about the people without platforms? What about the thousands of people across the country that some of whom were bankrupted by having to comply with these subpoenas? And they were harassed and their reputations were trashed, all because Jack Smith was going on a political witch hunt. How are we going to get recourse for them? Who is going to speak for them? That is really what I want to see out of this.
And is there any motivation on the Hill to do anything about this?
I hope, right? We are, I think still, I don't know yet that we are at the end of this. We've seen some documents come out of DOJ and FBI, but Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson are still getting documents from FBI whistleblowers. And that's from our own FBI.
Yeah.
Right? Whistleblowers are having to have to come out of that. So I think we don't even have all the documents yet. I don't even know if we know the extent of the damage. But at some point, I think we're getting close. And I think DOJ, FBI, and the Congress need to get together in a room and say, what are we doing about this?
Yeah. These are going to be the consequences. Well, I'm, like I said, very shocked by all of this. I'm very, very angered by it, especially because a lot of the people in it are our friends. Great people like Ed Corrigan, like Jeff Clark, and a great many others. Is very frustrating. But Rachel, where, as always, can people find you, keep up with the important work that you're doing, and see all of your bangers on X.com?
You can find me at Rachel Bovard, and I have been writing a little bit about Arctic frost for The Federalist, and you can find all those thoughts there.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to another fantastic episode of Moment of Truth, and thank you again to Rachel Bovard for making the time to be here with us. If you don't follow her on X.com already, I would. She is particularly savage. She has a lot of great tweets, many of which I repost, but make sure that you follow her work. Also, if you're a young person that works on the Hill, by the way, and you haven't done the House and Senate procedure class that they do here at the Conservative Partnership Institute, I would highly recommend that you do so. I haven't been through it, but I've heard a lot of Rachel and Ed Corrigan's lectures over the years. They're great. My wife went through the program and loved it when she was a baby reporter here on Capitol Hill. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at potentially attending that course. So thank you guys very much, and we will see you again next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.